Wow, Kelso, for an atheist, you sure do know a lot about religion.
You're listening to Blockchain 2025. The future is right now. Every week, we explore implications of the technology underpinning cryptocurrencies. Blockchain.
Each episode is a standalone examination of one industry broken into 3 segments. A basic overview, blockchain's disruptive impact, and relevant crypto projects.
Blockchain 2025 is part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network. Learn about Bitcoin, create a wallet, and buy your first Satoshis all at Bitcoin.com.
All right, Kelso, here we are. This is your second episode on Blockchain 2025. How you feeling?
Beautiful. Greetings from lovely, lovely La Jolla, California. Wind and Sea Beach, famous beach. Just loving every minute of it. So really great that you're having me back, man. Excited.
Yeah, man. Were you able to get the wife and kids out to record the podcast?
Yeah, I pushed them out today. Sent them with Nana, so they're running around spending my money.
Cool, man. Well, speaking of money, there's a very famous quote from L. Ron Hubbard, who started Scientology. And, quote, "You don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, you start a religion." And I think that definitely holds true today. But the tax benefits of starting religion, there's very wealthy people. I can think of a lot that have made their money through religion.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And, you know, it's easy to be cynical about it, for sure. The opposite side of that is, you know, the good that religion does. I'm a militant atheist, just to kind of put it out there. Like, I literally cannot stand religion of any kind. But that aside, I think it is important to acknowledge that they do a lot of good in terms of getting into the community and so on. And so maybe taxing them is, so in other words, when my fellow militant atheists go, see, they get away with not paying any taxes, I usually come back with, I'd rather no one pay taxes. But exactly. I mean, it definitely is a bit of a come on. It's like the world's biggest, most historic ICO.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I would say I don't have a firm stance on religion. And I kind of like and don't like the word spiritual, but I understand that just science, it can tell you how the world works, but it can't tell you how to emotionally adapt to the world, interact with other human beings. And echoing your point about religion, the community building that they do and giving people a sense of purpose and the way to deal with hard times. I mean, despite all the negatives that religion may have, I think that's a glaring positive. And you see this a lot.
Without a doubt.
There's a lot of really successful people that they always talk about God, whether it's in sports, business, politics, music, as the number one influence.
It is fundamental to the human experience. Even if you're not a cranky atheist like me, you have to grapple with the subject. And again, I have my biases, which for listeners, I want to put out there so they can take what I say with a grain of salt. But also, I should say, the smartest people I've ever met in my life, to a person, so woman or man, have all been believers of one kind or another, which is, again, a paradox that, I live with. But yeah, there's a lot of nuance and, we'll definitely get into it. But yeah, I think your quote from L. Ron Hubbard is apropos. I think it's something that we should always have in the back of our minds, that life is a series of proposals, of bets, of guesses. And religion is one you don't want to get wrong. So you want to make sure that you're as earnest as possible on this subject. So whether you come down on my side, which is, of course, the truth, or the other side, which is obviously wrong, come at it, come at it honestly. So anyway.
For sure. And, the 3-part episode, right? The first part would be the current industry of religion, which we've begun to talk about. I mean, Kelso, this is a big question here, but let's dive in a little bit to religion non-blockchain.
Well, I'm just going to take the Christian version of it just because it's a little easier to sort of navigate. If we broaden it too far, it's a giant rabbit hole. But
listeners, Kelso is going to do an amazing job giving the history of Christianity and religion up until today. But if you'd like to skip the religious history and go straight to the blockchain stuff, please fast forward to 8 minutes and 30 seconds.
Basically, Christianity begins with Roman Catholicism as we understand it. The Church of Rome, according to Catholic theology, right? Christ leaves his earthly church to Peter. He ascends, Christ does, into heaven. And then the church is kind of left to make its way until he returns. And then you get all these doctrinal divisions, and there's some early debate about whether the church should be just for this Jewish sect or should it be a broader proposition. and so on and so forth. You get about 1,500 years into the church. It's more or less developed Western civilization as we understand it. And then it starts to break apart. You get Martin Luther in Germany, you get Calvin in France, I guess, and what's his nuts in England, King Henry. And the Protestant Reformation begins. In essence, they break off from Mother Church. And today we have, the best way to think about it is two Christianities. So we have the Roman Catholic Church, and that's not exactly right because there's the Eastern Orthodox, but for my purposes, the Roman Catholic Church, and then Protestant Christianity, which is about 32,000, give or take, different denominations. So once they break off from Catholicism, then they start to break up within themselves. And, there's debates about whether the Sabbath is and, what Jesus really meant and all the stuff that we're familiar with. So today, what we're going to be talking about for the most part is kind of a twist on a pre-Vatican II Jesuit priest, early 20th century, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Basically, he came up with this idea that invoking science and so on, that I don't want to call it the singularity, but he calls it like the omega point, which will become relevant in just a second. He sort of develops this idea that science and religion will kind of meet and then it'll begin anew. The Catholic Church in modern times forks yet again. So if we use the Protestant Reformation of the 1500s as sort of its first major fork, you can say the 1960s were its second one. It's called Vatican II. It's an ecumenical council where the church brings together all of its members, its princes, its bishops, and its cardinals together. And they also bring in other religions to try and usher the Roman Catholic Church into the modern world. That was sort of their charter. It's very controversial because within the church itself, you can see 1965 is where the church divide. I mean, you go from priests in cassocks and women, religious nuns in the giant, basically burqas, for lack of a better phrase, but their habits. And now when you meet a Catholic priest, he might be wearing a Golden State Warriors t-shirt, and you don't even know he's a friggin' priest. Same with the nuns. And you call them by their first names. So how does that change happen? Vatican II changes that, for lack of, just to kind of summarize it quickly. They come out of there and they change the liturgy, which is the Mass of the church. It used to be in Latin, smells and bells, and these really ornate altars and all this other stuff. And only boys served as altar servers and so on. Out of Vatican II, it changes to the local vernacular. So if you go to church in Germany, you're going to hear the Mass in German, whereas before it was Latin and so on and so forth. You're also going to see now altar server girls who are part of the Mass. And then they turn the priest around. This is all sort of Catholic inside baseball, but the priest used to face what's called ad orientem. So he kind of, with the congregation, prayed in one direction. Well, now he turns around post-Vatican II, and he faces the congregation. All this is just wildly innovative as far as the church is concerned. Teilhard is part of this in the sense that when he was making his assumptions about the omega point pre-Vatican II, he was an anathema. The church wanted nothing to do with him. Vatican II brings him back. You find some heavy hitters. Later on, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, all of them cited him in one form or another. So he's more in vogue post-Vatican II, and now in the church, I believe the current Pope Francis has cited him in an encyclical. So he's relevant again, and that's no small thing. I mean, the Catholic Church, love him or hate him, they're a billion friggin' people, so you better understand it and at least be literate. So that gets us to, what's his face? Matt Liston, and I'll let you kind of do a little bit there with him being from Augur and all that stuff.
So yeah. Who is Matt Liston? He's a big player in the cryptocurrency space, blockchain space, and a developer. And it's quite interesting because he was actually at Augur, who we spoke about last week in prediction markets. And he had a falling out with Augur.
Yeah, I guess he was booted, right? And unceremoniously asked to leave. I'm not exactly sure of the particulars on that. Well, let's get first to what he's done, and then what he is will become more relevant. So why would we bring up Augur? Jesus.
Well, so he left Augur. Well, one, we got to promote last week's episode on prediction markets, which was really interesting. But two, he left Augur and joined Gnosis, which was also on last week's episode, which is a competitor to Augur. It's in consensus in Brooklyn, the big Ethereum blockchain startup hub or whatever you want to call it. And he is the chief strategy officer there. But if you go to his Twitter, it says architect 0x Omega. I mean, 0x Omega is a religion on the blockchain.
Yeah. And why that's interesting, besides just that it's a friggin' religion on the blockchain, is the fact that he's an atheist. So here we have an atheist trying to do something in the religious sphere, incorporating, our favorite subject, which is blockchain technology.
It is strange. And I admit, religion on the blockchain is kind of one of those, when you hear that, you kind of roll your eyes like, oh, they're doing X on the blockchain. To a certain extent, it may be true. Mm-hmm. I mean, before we even go into the project with Matt Liston, Kelso, what is it about blockchain that could be appealing to a religion?
Yeah, that's the question I had to ask too when I first heard it. I was just like, what? What is this guy doing? Because blockchain has become sort of the cocaine of corporate speak. You just say it and, people just, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. But, regardless of what it is, whether it's iced tea or now it's religion, the way he's approached it, from the article I read by this fellow Del Castillo, Michael Del Castillo of Forbes, he describes Liston as being earnest. So he too, Mr. Del Castillo, was kind of skeptical in the way that we are initially when we first heard about it. And he had a chance to really kind of sit down with Liston. He describes him as earnest, as honest, as, this is a project he is genuinely interested in. What I believe it is a system of religious governance. So in the same way, say, Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto was an answer to banking cartels and they're being in bed with government and kind of a central authority, it's just a single point of failure, all that good stuff. Religion is that way, or say established religion like the Catholic Church, which we spoke of earlier, is to the religious believer. It's a central authority.
It's very top down, isn't it? Religion is very, Catholicism, especially the Roman Catholic Church with the Pope and everything, is a very top down structure.
It has to be. It has to be. So in other words, relative to, again, I'm not casting aspersions or lauding the Catholic Church. I'm just describing it. If you have the truth, the truth is not democratic, right? We don't sit around and go, well, 2 + 2, what do you think? Well, my grandma, she's from Chile, her family, but okay, who gives a shit about your grandmother? Like, 2 + 2 is 4. It's for now, for forever, on Mars. The truth is the truth. So if you have it in the form of the Alpha and the Omega, the Christ, the new God made a helpless babe enters history 2018 years ago, you don't have to sell it. It is what it is. And you either, as Nakamoto says in some of his correspondence and email, and you either get it or you don't. I don't have time to explain it to you. And that's really what, Catholicism is. It has to be. Religion, well, I say has to be. It has been this way. So it makes sense because it follows. You have the truth. There ain't no debate about this. You either believe he's God, made flesh, walked the earth for 33 years, did all these cool things and bounced, or you don't. There's just no half measure.
So in Roman Catholicism, then the Pope, right?
Right.
Like the Pope in the Vatican, he's like the closest to the truth then.
Yeah, it depends on, again, how you look at the theology of Catholicism, and you'll get some pushback there because especially proponents of the church like to say that, oh, the stupid Catholics believe the Pope to be infallible. No, it's more like the Pope, in a weird way, he's a servant, right? The Pope cannot get up tomorrow morning and go, by the way, Jesus was a woman. He can't do that. That's not to say he couldn't utter those words, but he would be summarily sacked. He cannot change the fundamentals of dogma. So I'll take another controversy like women in the priesthood. Now, technically, that's a tradition and not a dogma, but Pope John Paul II said, hey, women are a vital part of the church and certainly the vast majority of believers in the church and workers in the church, but Christ chose men. I can't go back and think about it for a second, right? That takes a lot of integrity because what could get you more, warm fuzzies and more money and more adherents than to take women in, right? To make you the most popular pope ever. And yet he doesn't. And neither does Francis, neither does Benedict or any of the other popes faced with this issue. So if they're as cynical as we began with the L. Ron Hubbard quote, right, you'd think they'd do anything to get a buck. But here again, they have the truth. And they have to, again, it's a long way to go, they have to bump up against the truth as well. So let's say Francis, who's considered the current pope, considered very progressive, say he wants to. And he can probably say in passing on a plane or to a group of reporters, I'd love to make women priests, but I just can't. I'd love to make 2 + 2 6, guys. I just can't do it.
Man, Kelso, you know a lot. For an atheist, you are very knowledgeable about the history and also contemporary religion. I'm very impressed.
Well, there's different types of atheists. There's the petulant, just like there are anarchists or anybody. There's the petulant one who just wants to do what he wants and whatever. And then there's a different type of atheist who's, grappled with the subject and reasoned his way or her way, to a position. And that's kind of the specter I come out of. I don't hate the church. I don't have some weird toddler like, oh, you guys are so awful. It's just not the truth. The way that they think it's the truth, I don't believe it is, based on my reckoning of it.
Interesting. And so, Kelso, but in any event, right, let's go back to Matt Liston, the atheist. He's challenging religion, basically.
As did Nakamoto to the banks, right? He's challenging the Catholic Church. Not just the Catholic Church, but for our purposes, the Catholic Church. The central authority. He wants to create, in my opinion, he's Martin Luther, but with an iPhone. He's Martin Luther, but a hotshot tech dev dude with capital and the ears of hedge funds. So he's starting another reformation. So if Luther said no intermediary between God and man, like the priest and so on, well, Liston's calling him on it. Well, why do we even have a church structure? Why don't we use the consensus of blockchain to build the next phase of religion, which is, when you think about it, whoa, mind-blowing,
Yeah, and so let's go into 0x Omegas. In terms of a blockchain, the governance part you mentioned, I guess records, an immutable ledger that records records and data forever, I guess you could say. What exactly is going to happen at 0x Omega? You said you've looked into Matt and his co-founder?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if she's a co-founder, but she certainly is his first acolyte, his first follower, his first true believer, if you will. his apostle. Avery, I just lost her name.
If anyone was going to do it, it was these two, Avery Singer and Matt Liston.
Avery Singer, she's an artist. And there's a Vimeo video of these guys talking at a conference recently, I think this month. We should probably link to in the show notes. Right away. These are, as soon as you see them, these are two people that are going to create a religion on the blockchain. Yeah. So she's an artist, and so she gesticulates when she talks. She talks in circles as he writes in circles. And so they're just a pair made in heaven. In the video, they have their first sort of sacred object that I believe she designed, which is something like a fish, or you have to look at it. It's on Liston's Twitter, his avatar. But I think it has doge kind of as the focal point up top, and then he becomes a fish, or I don't know. But yeah, so the idea is with everything with blockchain, it comes down to time stamping things. So the immutability part is just that this happened and you cannot say it didn't happen. So you can change it. That's what's sort of paradoxical about blockchain. It's not immutable in the sense that you can't someday alter it going forward. You just can't back change it. So what they're doing now, it appears to me, assuming they're logging all this, because I haven't seen an official website or a launch go up just yet, is they're sort of laying the foundation for it. They're creating a foundation for their religion. They're creating sacred objects. I believe Matt has written what he calls a flame paper, which would sort of act as, I guess, their Bible or their first sacred text. I have not been able to get my hands on that, and I tried. So I apologize to listeners for that. So I'm just going to guess at it, which he outlines what it is that they're doing. So again, you can see the building of religion, but if you put this onto a blockchain and you get enough people, I'm not sure what enough people means, or believers or whatever, then they can decide whether to go forward with it, or they have a plurality or a quorum, or however, whatever the decision matrix is there. They go forward with these objects, or they don't, or these basic ideas, and they can change it. But you can see right away, as we discussed, that the Roman Catholic Church is not a democracy, that the truth is not a democracy. Well, now you have someone kind of saying, maybe it could be.
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and I think the whole idea of creating a scripture that can be updated, I think he's very science-based. So when you have new information, if you're intellectual, then your opinion will change.
Right.
I realize they want to get into fundraising and just modern transparency, but just not having a central point for a religion and being able to update these sacred texts based on new information technology. Like, when the Bible was written, we thought the world was flat. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And I think the article says, listen, this is a very, very sharp person. You can see what he's doing with Gnosis. And they don't seem to be taking it as a joke. I mean, there's some other, We'll quickly talk about some other ones. I mean, there's the a Lotus network, which is Buddhism on the blockchain. And Lotus, to me, it's like an app to connect, like meditation and spirituality teachers with students, and using the blockchain and a token to power it, to pay for it. So, it's like an online Buddhism classes, two-sided marketplace.
What I liked about it that you mentioned to me, because you found it before I did, was you say that they're actually somewhat critical of Buddhism, right?
Yeah, so that was interesting too, because they're like, everyone in the West, myself included, before reading their white paper, was like, oh yeah, you think Buddhism is just incorruptible. Unlike, Catholicism and a lot of I think the Christian churches, like the Joel Osteen Christian churches in the South,
right?
These like 17,000 seat stadiums, giving money to God, or like the born again stuff, or what's the televangelism. There's a lot of dishonesty and money grabs in Buddhism, which is something I didn't know.
Yeah. If you look at Myanmar right now, and oh man, I just drew another blank. Aung San Suu Kyi, I think is her name. She was sort of the it girl. She won the Nobel Prize. Progressives, especially in the United States, marched her around everywhere. And then she went back to Myanmar and decided to crack down on an ethnic Muslim minority. The Rohingya, I believe their names are. And it's turned into if not a genocide, something like the first sort of, not first, but kind of in this century anyway, it's sort of the first Buddhist atrocity. And it's real interesting. Yeah, Buddhism is, again, remember listeners where I'm coming from. It's just as shitty as all the others. There's a lot of stuff that, we as Westerners have the luxury of picking, like we love to do. We cafeteria, we pick out the stuff we like. Ooh, I like the statues, I like the malas, the bracelets and so on. The meditation part of it. But yeah, it is a religion. And there are, just as it's hard to describe Christianity as one thing, because you grab two Christians and you ask them what it is, you're going to get two wildly different answers. It's the same with Buddhism. There are lots of variations on that theme, and so on. But anyway, there's lots to criticize about it. And so I just found that in the white paper, it's certainly not the import of their white paper, but I found it interesting that they addressed it.
Yeah, for sure. I got anything out of it. I'm glad I got that point out. But, they made that point. And then the whole idea of, I guess, the scientific study of meditation using blockchain, kind of recording all these data from, I guess, where everyone meditating wears heartbeat-like monitors and EEG headsets.
Yeah.
It is very sci-fi.
Yeah.
But by doing that, they have all this data on the blockchain, and it will contribute to the scientific study of meditation. To me, it seems like a meditation app using blockchain for teachers and students of, say, Buddhism or meditation. And I'd have to say that it seems, and I hope they prove me wrong, because if what they're doing could be really cool, but it does seem just kind of like another blockchain project.
A little on the scammy side. Again, I'm with you on this. Take it with a grain of salt. We're just reading just like every other Joe Schmo would. But a tad scammy. But on the meditation side, there is something to that. The Lancet, I believe it was a few years ago, compared those who practice various forms of meditation, as we understand that word, the Eastern kind of idea, and say the Catholic practice of the rosary, found to definitely reduce heart rates and calmness, and led to all sorts of beneficial things. And there are atheists. Penn Jillette recently started meditating. He doesn't obviously see it as a spiritual pursuit. He just sees it as a way to calm himself down and to get centered and so on. So yeah, there's something to say about it, and hopefully they do good work there.
Listen, this is not a criticism towards meditation or spirituality or Buddhism. It's just that the fact that you need to use blockchain and a coin to make it work is actually pretty funny. If you go to the founding team at lotos.network,
exactly.
And one of the co-founders, his name is Mike Hogan, and co-founder, science. You click on the photo, and it's a photo of him, I guess, applying like sensors, maybe EEG sensors, to a Buddhist monk and his robe and everything. It's quite funny. We'll add the photo for sure and share the link to it. But yeah.
I mean, the Beastie Boys brought the friggin' Dalai Lama here. So I don't,
yeah,
there's some precedents.
We'll see. I mean, let's sum it up here. I'd say that also, my take on religion on the blockchain, I'm highly skeptical. I think this is one that it'll be interesting to see how these things play out. I do like the idea of data that can last for years and years. But besides that, I don't see a huge purpose in a religion on a blockchain, unless you're just talking about the DAO. It's just a decentralized organization or governance. Yeah, if a religion could govern their funds this way, could be interesting, but it seems more like a theory thing than actually working in practice.
Oh, I'm sure you're right. Yeah, I'm more than skeptical. I think this is probably a couple projects that are destined to fail. But that said, I'm sort of rooting for 0x Omega, because not in my lifetime, but certainly in our parents' lifetime and our grandparents' lifetime, we've seen a couple religions take hold. In the United States, a distinctly U.S. religion is Mormonism. And then, of course, we have Scientology more recently. And you can there's video evidence of L. Ron Hubbard. We can kind of see their doctrines evolve, how they use influence with states to get. So I kind of like the historical or social control in the scientific sense, where we can kind of see a religion develop. And, like you say, it's theory, but it would be interesting to see what Zero X Omega does if it grabs hold, that people actually, I think they do want Big Daddy the Pope. I mean, that's what Papa, father means. They do want sort of that central control, and then they kind of want to do what they want to do. So Zero X Omega and Matt and Avery, they're calling you out. They're saying, okay, are you serious about this? So let's go in this direction. So is he their prophet? Is he their crypto sire or whatever?
Yeah, because then you have the founders of these religions on blockchains. Do they just become the same things they were trying to replace?
There's some eerie parallels to Satoshi Nakamoto, right? If you assume he's one person, he bequeaths his gift to the world, which I'm telling you, there are some people who, and I'm guilty a little bit of this, at least because I'm staring right now at a walled poster we just put up in my house, the white paper. So I'm just as guilty as anybody else, that some people have superstitious reverence for this thing. And so Satoshi releases it to the world, and then he bounces, man. He escapes, as we say in the ghetto, and now he's gone, right? We hope for his return. This sounds really, really familiar. And then he's left his followers to battle it out, right? Or we're battling it out. Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Gold and Bitcoin Core, right? We're all going at it there. And poor Roger Ver has gone from Bitcoin Jesus to Bitcoin Judas in some people's eyes. I mean, there's a lot of weird religious parallels here. But I think what Matt is at least hoping to do, assuming this thing takes off, is that he starts it, and then with the consensus rules, future people can either, like you say, take the sacred text, whatever those are, and make them into living documents and change them as, facts on the ground inform them. But then he also fades away over time. That it is the group that sort of takes it with it. So that I find a lot of interesting parallels.
For sure. There's definitely kind of like a juxtaposition of like the scientific method to religion. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and the influence of the founders as it goes over time. But Kelso, interesting episode. It was good to do kind of a non-traditional industry that we usually cover.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, we'll see you next week.
Yeah, same. May Satoshi bless you and keep you.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin.com podcast network. To learn more about our shows, visit Bitcoin.com/podcast. Bitcoin.com podcast network.